どうも、勝手に連絡2.0で始めたいと思います。今日1137回目というところで、このワールドエナジーアウトルック2023が出たので、このあたりで IEA のところですね、実際に結構今回って EV とこの太陽光というところがかなり伸びていって起爆剤になっているみたいなところがあるので、IEA 目線のこの太陽光というところどういう、評価をしているのかみたいなところをですね、少し見てみたいなと思っていますと。実際にこれチャット GPT にもちょっとまとめて書いてもらったら、少しですね、この新記録の設置ってこと、これちょっと訳は違うと思うんですけど、2023年には新しい予測となる500ギガワット以上の再生可能エネルギーの発電容量が追加される予定あり、太陽光発が重要な貢献。太陽光は多分重要な貢献しているんだろうっていうところが言われてますと。で、投資動から1日に10億米ドル以上が太陽光発電に投じられる予定である。これはクリーンエネルギー繊維の重要な一環だ。もちろん合ってるか間違ってるかはこれからちょっと見ていかないといけないと。で、製造能力の拡大、太陽光モジュールの製造能力は急速に拡大している。これはクリーンエネルギーシステムの重要なコンポーネントの供給をサポートしていると。ソーラー PV のグローバルな展開ペースということで、未来のトレンドに影響を与える可能性のある重要な確実性として、ソーラー PV のグローバルな展開のペースが探求されています。太陽光発電はクリーンエネルギーの繊維の加速、投資の増加、製造能力拡大など、ワールドエナジーアウトロック2023において重要なテーマとなっており、これらは太陽光発電のグローバルな展開とその展開の展望に対する洞察を提供しているということで、チャット GPT の中でもですね、かなりこの太陽光っていうところが結構重要なとこを占め始めたのかなっていうところですと。で、実際に、章立てでもこのA boom of solar manufacturing could be a boon for the world とか、solar module manufacturing and trade, solar PV development could scale up faster to accelerate transition とかいうことで、ソーラーの章立てもありますし、as the fact changes, so do our projections ということで、ソーラー PV and wind generation っていうのが、やっぱりソーラーとウィンド、風力っていうところが重要されていると。で、will domestic solar PV module manufacturing keep pace with solar capacity growth in India? インドでも実はこのソーラーっていうところがかなり影響出てくるってことですね。against this complex backdrop, and the emergence of the new clean energy economy led by solar PV and electric vehicle EVs provides hope for the way forward. Investment in clean energy has risen by 40% since 2020. The push to bring down emissions is the key reason, but not the only one. The economic case for major clean energy technologies is strong. Energy security is also an important factor, particularly in fuel importing countries as their industrial strategies and the desire to create clean energy jobs. Not all clean technologies are thriving, and some supply chains, notably for wind, are under pressure. But there are striking examples of an accelerating pace of change. In 2020, one in 25 cars sold was electrolyte. In 2023, this is now one in five. すごいですね。25台に1台が EV だったのが、もう今5台に1台だと。More than 500 gigawatts of renewable generation capacity are set to added in 2023. 500ギガワットも導入されていると。A new record. それが新記録だということですね。More than USD 1 billion a day is being spent on solar development. Manufacturing capacity for key components of the green energy system, including solar PV modules and EV batteries, is expanding fast. This momentum is why the IEA recently concluded in its updated net zero roadmap that a pathway to limiting global warming to 1.5 cesium is very difficult but remains open. A boom of solar manufacturing could be a boon for the world. Solar manufacturing has experienced a remarkable expansion over the last decade, increasing tenfold globally to meet increasing demand for clean energy. This trend is set to continue at the elevated pace, with investment in the pipeline set to raise global solar module manufacturing capacity from about 640 gigawatts in 2022 to over 1,200 gigawatts in the medium term, paired with rapid expansion along the supply chain from the production of polysilicon to wafers and solar cells. Solar PV is poised to accelerate clean energy transition around the world. Solar PV has been one of the major successes of the past decade, with annual deployment of electricity generation capacity growing more than sevenfold. Manufacturing capacity expansion has been even faster, and the gap has driven down the utilization rate of solar manufacturing from close to 60% to below 40% in 2022. This is well below the 70% level that would normally be considered healthy for the major industry. In the steps, global solar PV deployment continues to expand from around 220 gigawatt in 2032 to about 500 gigawatt in 2030. But planned manufacturing expansion means that the utilization rate of solar manufacturing remains below 40% through to 2030. The scope to make fuller use of solar manufacturing capacity represents a numerous opportunity to accelerate the deployment of solar PV around the world and accelerate energy transition. Global solar module manufacturing and solar PV capacity additions in the steps 2010 to 2030というところで、これ実際プロダクションキャパシティでヒストリカルとプランと予定ということでガーンとやっぱり増えてきているというようなところが、年間あたりの導入量というのがガーンと増えてくる、特に1000ギガワットぐらいを超えてくるっていうところまで、見えてきたっていうところですね。で、ユーティライゼーションレイトということで、実際にその割合、導入割合というところもやっぱり4割とか5割に近づいてくるっていうところですね。Step Solar PV Capacity Additions. The planned expansion of solar manufacturing outpaces solar PV capacity addition to 2030. Its low utilization rate presents a huge opportunity to accelerate clean energy transitions. Solar module manufacturing and trade. Solar manufacturing today is highly concentrated. Just 5 countries account for over 90% of global capacity. China is far and away the largest. やっぱり中国ですね。With the capacity to produce solar module with an output of over 500 gigawatt every year, equivalent to 80% of world manufacturing capacity. 8% 中国だと。The other four and Vietnam 5% of the global market, India 3%, Malaysia 3%, and Thailand 2%. 面白いですよね。中国以外はもう中国の下の方に南部にあるようなマレーシア、タイ、インド、ベトナムみたいなところがあると。The next 5 leading solar manufacturers, the United States, Korea, Cambodia, Turkey, and Chinese Taipei, each account around 1% of the global total as does the European Union. While fewer than 40 countries have capacity to produce solar modules, over 100 countries completed solar PV projects in 2022, which mostly relied on imported solar panels. China is the primary exporter of solar panels. Its exports and those of other exporters facilitate the expansion of renewable energy in markets around the world. Southeast Asia is the second largest exporter. 面白いですよ。やっぱり東南アジアってめちゃくちゃ重要になってくるのわかりますよね。Second largest exporter. With many of the panel is exports going to the United States and the European Union. As domestic manufacturing capacity in India has increased in recent years, there is potential to reduce important dependence over the coming years. Today, the European Union and the United States are the largest importer of solar panels. New import tariffs have recently been put in place in the United States on solar modules that originate in China. These are set to change the pattern of imports to the United States and may have knock-on effects in other markets. Planned solar module manufacturing capacity and solar PV capacity additions in the steps 2030. ソーラーモデュールエクスポーターっていうことで、もうチャイナがめちゃくちゃ多いっていうのもダントツだと。でもその中で2位がサウスイーストエイジア、東南アジアっていうところとインドっていうところになってると。で、ソーラーモデュールインポーターズ。でも一般のやっぱり需要って言ったらやっぱり国の大きいところになってくるので、ユナイテッド、アメリカだとかヨーロッパっていうところはめちゃくちゃでかいと。で、ソーラーマニュファクチャリング is set to expand in more than a dozen countries. China remains the largest exporter, while the European Union and the United States remains the main importers. Plans for additional capacity suggest that solar manufacturing will remain highly concentrated and that trade will continue to be important for many markets. China plans to add another 500 gigawatt of solar module manufacturing capacity in the coming years, far outstripping plans for new capacity in other countries. The expansion on this scale means that it is likely to maintain its 80% share of the global total and to remain the primary exporter of solar modules by some distance. India aims to continue expanding its production capacity to meet domestic needs and to export solar modules products projects in the pipeline under the production-linked incentives scheme suggest that its manufacturing capacity could exceed 70 gigawatts per year by 2027. Production capacity in Southeast Asia is set to outpace regional needs, allowing it to remain an important exporter. In the United States, planned solar module production capacity investments have been boosted by the Inflation Reduction Act and on course to increase sixfold in the medium term. However, without further investment, significant inputs will still be needed to meet fast-growing solar PV development in the steppes in 2030. Solar manufacturing in the European Union is set to double in the medium term. But here too, deployment is increasing rapidly, and about 70% of deployment in 2030 will depend on imported solar modules unless further investment are made in manufacturing in the European Union. Solar PV deployment could scale up faster to accelerate transitions. Planned increases in the solar PV manufacturing capacity around the world have the potential to enable over 800 gigawatts of new solar PV to be deployed in 2030, which is in line with the level of deployment reached in the NZE scenario in 2030. This would raise the average utilization rate for solar module manufacturing to around 70%, which is roughly what might be expected in many major industry. We have constructed the NZE solar case, which looks at what would happen if all the potential solar capacity was tapped and compares the outcomes in 2030 with those in the steps. The rest of this section highlights this comparison. Global solar PV and battery stage capacity additions and power sector CO2 emission 2022 and 2030。で、実際にこのソーラー PV& バッテリーキャパシティアディションで、実際に追加されていく2022年からと2030年で、もちろん、ネットゼロっていう計画と普通の計画っていうところではガーンと下がりますけど、これ見たらもう4倍ぐらいになっていてもおかしくないっていう状況であります。で、バッテリーのストレージももう何倍、数倍っていう状況になっていると。で、パワーセクター CO2 エミッションってことで、実際に、CO2 エミッションっていうところも変わってくるというところです。An important initial point is that rapid further deployment of solar PV in the NZE solar case would require measures to integrate the additional solar PV into electricity system and maximize its impact. Scaling up battery storage would be crucial in most cases to improve the alignment of solar PV output with electricity demand patterns and system needs. In the NZ solar case, utility-scale battery deployment in 2030 is close to double the level in the steps. Measures to modernize and expand the networks, facilitate demand response, and boost power system flexibility would also be necessary. Accelerating solar PV deployment to the level in the NZE scenario would reduce CO2 emissions in 2030 by displacing some unbated fossil fuels. Global CO2 emission from the power sector would fall below 11 gigaton in 2030, some 15% lower than the level in the steps in 2030 and 30% below the level in 2022. Coal-fired electricity generation would be around 15% lower than in the steps in 2030. The decline in coal-fired generation would largely take place in emerging market and development economies and would deliver the bulk of the emissions reductions. Natural gas-fired electricity generation would also be reduced by 50% compared with the steps in 2030, with reduction in both advanced economies and emerging market and developing economies. China could accelerate solar PV deployment to shift away from coal faster. In steps, solar PV capacity additions in China reached over 270 gigawatts per year before flattening. While this means marked slowing of the rate of the growth achieved in recent years, it still puts China 5 years ahead of schedule to reach 1,200 gigawatts of solar PV and wind capacity. which is one of the targets for 2030 in its nationally determined contribution. Nevertheless, there is scope for China to accelerate its uptake of both distributed solar PV and large-scale projects. In the NZE solar case, China's annual solar PV capacity additions exceeded 400 gigawatts by 2030. To successfully integrate the additional solar PV and keep curtailment at manageable levels, battery storage and networks enhancements would be as important in China as everywhere else. Continued progress on power system reforms, including further moves toward an unified national power market, would help make the best use of the additional solar PV. Solar PV capacity addition and coal-fired electricity generation in China in the steps and LZE solar case 2020 to 25. Solar PV capacity additions, new LZE solar case 実際ネットゼロの、ケースだとかなり増やしていくっていう状況になっている。その追加量はですね。実際に coal-fired electrification generation というところで、実際にネットゼロでいくと2030年までに、coal-fired ですね、石炭由来ってところは、基本的にはもう3分の1ぐらいに減っていくっていう必要があると。With targeted integration measures, China could deploy significantly more solar PV and put coal-fired power into a steeper decline. Effectively integrated higher solar PV deployment would accelerate the transition away from coal-fired power in China. While coal-fired generation would still peak around 2025, it would decline more steeply afterward. By 2030, the level of coal-fired generation in the NZE solar case would be 20% lower than in the steppes and 35% lower than in 2022. Without assuming any additional retirements, the average annual capacity factor for coal-fired power plants would fall to about 30% in 2030, compared with about 40% in the steppes and over 50% in 2022. As a result, power sector CO2 emissions would fall to about 4.2 gigatons in 2030, a 30% reduction from the 2022 level. Emerging market and development economies could also shift away from coal faster. Spare solar PV manufacturing capacity could also facilitate faster uptake of low-cost solar PV in emerging market and development economies other than China. In the NZE solar case, more than 70 gigawatts of additional solar PV is deployed each year to 2030 across Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean, Middle East, and Southeast Asia. Even with modest amounts of curtailment, this would reduce both natural gas-fired and coal-fired power generation by about one quarter in 2030 compared with the level in the steppes, cutting power sector CO2 emission in 2030 by over 500 megatons, 30% of the total. The Middle East would also have the opportunity to cut both coal and natural gas use in power, while in LAC, the additional solar PV would mostly reduce demand for natural gas-fired generation in Africa and Southeast Asia. Its biggest impact would be on coal-fired power. Additional solar PV capacity additions in the NZE solar case and related impacts in selected region relative to the steps 2030. まさにサウスイーストエイジアっていうところであれば、このソーラーっていうのがかなり入っていく。Additional solar capacity per year to 2030 20ギガぐらい入っていくんですけども、実際にこのインパクトで減らす効果があるんですね。特にこのコール。実際にコールファイアルジェネレーションだとか、ナチュラルガスも減らしますし、パワーセクター CO2 エミッションっていうのももちろん減らしていく。Additional solar PV deployed in emerging market and developing economies could significantly reduce generation from coal and natural gas and cut CO2 emissions. Hydropower resources in LAC and Africa could facilitate the integration of more solar PV, while the Middle East reliance on the natural gas would also help to provide system flexibility. Southeast Asia would face the more serious integration challenges, which could be eased by expanding interconnections and cross-border trade. In all emerging market and development economies, access to finance and that reduced cost of capital would be essential to be able to take advantage of the opportunity to accelerate uptake of solar PV. Solar PV and wind generation. The steps projection for solar PV and wind generation to 2030 have increased substantially in successive editions of Outlook since 2019. Four main factors have been at play. Politics and the number of countries with politics that support expansion of solar PV and wind has steadily risen, and now stands at over 114. At the same time, policy ambitions and related support have been reached up many times in major markets, including in China, European Union, India, Japan, and the United States. Cost reduction between 2010 and 2022, the levelized cost of electricity fell by about 90% for solar PV, 70% for onshore wind, and 60% for offshore wind. Also, there has been a rise in costs in recent years, which have created difficulties, in particular for wind power in some advanced economies. Those cost reductions have largely followed anticipated learning rates linked to the scaling up of deployment and technology innovation. In general, policy support and cost reduction have created a virtuous cycle. Increased policy support raised the level of deployment, which led to cost reductions, and those cost reductions have led to additional deployment. Manufacturing capacity and industrial policies. IEA projection now fully account for development in clean energy supply chains, which in some cases have far outpaced actual deployment and created an opportunity for further rapid increases, notably for solar PV. Financing conditions. Cost of capital for solar PV and wind power is especially important because upfront capacity and capital costs account for the majority of their lifetime costs. Tried and tested policy and regulatory frameworks have helped reduce financing costs by providing operators with a high degree of revenue certainty, usually through long-term contracts. Against this backdrop, today higher borrowing costs are cause for concern as they complicated project economics and could title cost calculation back towards often polluting technologies that have lower upfront costs but lock in long-term expenditure for fuel. These factors have been very positive overall for the expansion of wind power and solar PV and help to explain year-on-year increases in projected deployment. However, the growth in wind and solar PV generation to 2030 in the steps is far below the level needed to limit warming to 1.5 Celsius, highlighting the urgent need for further measures to achieve the goals of the ELZE scenario. Increase in solar PV and wind power capacity between 2022 and 2030 in 5 editions of World Energy Works. Wind and solar PV projection that checked up as policy supported increases, cost fell and manufacturing expanded, yet more is needed to get on track for net zero emissions. Will domestic solar PV module manufacturing keep pace with solar capacity growth in India? India has historically been the net importer for fossil fuels, and it has now become an importer of modern clean energy technologies as it scales up solar and wind power generation capacity. For example, its imports of solar PV modules in 2021 to 2022 were valued at USD 3.4 billion. Recognizing this import dependence and mindful of the high level of concentration in clean energy technology supply chains, the national government launched the Production Linked Incentive (PLI) program in 2020 to support domestic manufacturing in a range of critical sectors, including solar PV module and advanced chemistry cell battery manufacturing. The PLI program for solar PV module manufacturing budgeted neatly USD 2.5 billion in subsidies with the aim of creating 65 gigawatts per year of new manufacturing capacity. Manufacturing companies were selected in two tranches in 2023, and a total of 48 gigawatts of new capacity was deemed eligible for subsidies awarded once manufacturing begins. These new production lines are expected to come online within 2 or 3 years. Solar PV module manufacturing capacity and solar PV capacity addition in India by scenario to 2030.ソーラーモデュールマニュファクチャリングキャパシティが伸びてますね。ソーラーキャパシティアディションということで、かなり毎年ですね、この30から40ギガワットぐらいを増やしていくみたいなことが書いてある。If planned solar PV module manufacturing capacity additions under the production linked incentives materialize, they would be adequate to meet domestic demand this decade. India is expected to meet its 2030 target to have half of its electricity capacity by non-fossil fuel before the end of the decade. New module manufacturing capacity under the solar PV module manufacturing capacity in India to well over what is needed until the end of this decade, not just in the steps, but also in their APS. Solar PV module imports could continue for a few years because developers will source the cheapest panel available because the capacity utilization factor remains lower than the nameplate capacity, and because there are lags between the nameplate capacity coming online and the panel being manufactured, shipped, and installed. Nonetheless, as domestic production ramps up, solar module imports will decline, and it's helped to establish India as a reliable exporter. That's all.